There is no single method of learning that guarantees success. How we learn that depends on many different factors. And what works best for you will not necessarily be the same as the approach used for the other students even they study the same course. We are all unique as learners, although some patterns emerge for many groups of students.
Australia has one of the world's most important mining industries. It is a major exporter of coal, iron ore, gold and copper and is self-sufficient in all minerals bar petroleum. Since the first discoveries, the coal in 1798, mineral production has risen every year. In the decade to 1992 it doubled.
Yellow is considered as the most optimistic color. Yet surprisingly, people lose their tempers more often in yellow rooms and babies cry more in them. The reason may be that yellow is the hardest color for eyes to take in. So it can be overpowering if overused.
The Roman state was tested almost to destruction by the defeat at Cannae by the Carthaginians led by Hannibal, and according to the historian Polybius, it was only what he called the peculiar virtues of the Roman constitution that allowed it to survive this crisis.
Aquaculture, also known as aqua farming, is the farming of aquatic organisms such as fish, crustaceans, mollusks, and aquatic plants. Aquaculture involves cultivating freshwater and saltwater populations under controlled conditions.
When we recycle, used materials are converted into new products, reducing the need to consume natural resources. If used materials are not recycled, new products are made by extracting fresh, raw material from the earth, through mining and forestry. Recycling helps conserve important raw materials and protects natural habitats for the future. Social work is not the only subject in sociology. Social work is not the only subject in sociology.
The technician left the new microscope in the biology lab. The technician left the new microscope in the biology lab.
The office said Dr. Smith will arrive later today. The office said Dr. Smith will arrive later today.
Contemporary critics dismissed his idea as eccentric. Contemporary critics dismissed his idea as eccentric.
Professor Tim Lee invented World Wide Web. Professor Tim Lee invented World Wide Web.
This part of the story is the story of my father. This part of the story is the story of my father. You can pay using cash or a credit card. You can pay using cash or a credit card.
Fishing is a sport and a means for surviving. Fishing is a sport and a means for surviving.
Moving up the class ladder also brings unexpected costs. Moving up the class ladder also brings unexpected costs. She is an expert of the 18th century French literature. She is an expert of the 18th century French literature.
The graph below depicts the distribution of water over the planet. It can be seen that salt water makes up 97.5% of the world's water, while fresh water makes up only 2.5%. Glaciers and permanent snow take up the most space in the freshwater sector, accounting for 68.7%, followed by groundwater, which accounts for 30.06%. Ground ice and permafrost consume 0.86% of fresh water, while other resources consume 1.22%. Lakes, on the other hand, account for the majority of the 0.26% of the total. Finally, this picture provides a wealth of information about global water distribution.
The graph below depicts the Sun's composition in terms of its proportions. Hydrogen, helium, and carbon are among the elements. The proportion of hydrogen in this graph is approximately 60%, while the fraction of helium is approximately 16%. This graph shows that hydrogen has the highest proportion, around 60%. Carbon, nitrogen, and silicon have the smallest proportions in this graph, each accounting for less than 1%. Finally, hydrogen has the largest percentage.
The graph below depicts information about an auditorium. This is a stunning image that conveys a lot of information. According to this graph, there are 7 red-colored columns of seats. Following it, in front of the seating area, there is a tiny dais. The indoor illumination is incredibly bright, as you can see from this graph. This graph also shows that there is a large white projection screen behind the dais. 6 windows can be found in the walls. Finally, this graph is quite useful.
The graph below depicts information regarding Dubai gold sales. The month is represented on the horizontal axis, which ranges from January to December. According to this graph, the value in January is around 200, while the value in February is around 210. The maximum value, according to this graph, is around 300 in March. The lowest figure, according to this graph, is approximately 100 between July and September. Finally, this graph is quite useful.
Everyone wants to improve their eating habits. One of the simplest methods is to add grains. Because many people in the United States are becoming increasingly concerned about their nutrition, grains are frequently served in restaurants. Many grains are now also available in supermarket stores, however some must still be purchased through health food stores. However, because uncooked grains last a long time, you can store up before you leave. You'll find grains to be simple to prepare. Cooking several grains is as easy as cooking spaghetti. For example, barley is simply boiled in salted water. Remember that no matter how long you boil whole grain barley, the most healthy kind, it will never be as soft as spaghetti. Salads made with grains are also simple to prepare. Simply utilize grains that have been left over from a hot meal. Because grains don't wilt like lettuce, you can put together a grain salad hours ahead of time. But, returning to health considerations, all grains are nutrient-dense, and several have unique properties. Barley has a low fat content. It may even lower cholesterol levels, according to some specialists. Jasmine rice is also fat-free. It also has a benefit in the form of a great aroma, a unique scent.
The World Health Organization estimates that 400 million people around the world lack access to basic health care. That is an incredible number of people. Basic sanitation and clean water, prenatal care, and vaccines or immunizations for children are just a few of the services available. This crisis is caused by a variety of factors. People may live too far away to receive timely care in the event of an emergency. Even in a city, the patient-to-doctor ratio can be as high as 50,000 people per doctor, making it impossible for one doctor to address the needs of the community's health care. These are valuable people who are physically suffering because they were created in the image of God. Many do not have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So we provide a week of hands-on training that covers a wide range of topics, including basic sanitation and hygiene, vital sign taking, wound care and infection prevention, basic birth helping, and emergency skills. Those who complete the course have practical skills in supplies that they can use to care for people in their community in a way that glorifies God and offers up new opportunities to share the gospel.
What do we call a person who repairs cars? What do we call a person who repairs cars?
What does a sundial measure? What does a sundial measure?
What is the word in geometry for a shape that has three sides? What is the word in geometry for a shape that has three sides?
Which color do we make by blending black and white? Which color do we make by blending black and white?
What do pedestrians move by? What do pedestrians move by?
What is the opposite of convex? What is the opposite of convex?
So, I think you all know what I mean by globalization, don't you? This is the idea that we all live in a global village. With instant communications, we can share ideas and consume cultural artifacts from countries all over the world just by going into the internet and all dream up, basically. The world is shrinking. In terms of speeds, it is accelerating, but in terms of distance, it's shrinking. What do I mean by detraditionalization? I mean the disappearance or the erosion, for the better word to use, the erosion of traditional values, of conventional ways of doing things, of conventional moralities. More and more young people around the world are rejecting the culture they grow up in, and it's probably a little bit cruel. But some imitating a Hollywood model of society, rather than the one which they inherit from their local tradition background. Okay?
Now we spend a lot of time thinking about how climate will affect crops. But crops affect climate themselves, and they do this in two ways. First of all, about 1/4 of the land surface is used for growing crops. Another 10 to 15% are used for pasture. So a substantial amount of the land surface is used in crop and agricultural production. And how we use that land affects our climate. If we were, for example, to deforest a substantial area and replace it with the annual crop such as soybean, then we would alter the characteristics of the land surface, alter the way that water and heat flows from the land surface to the atmosphere and back, and ultimately change the regional climate if that is not enough to change the land surface. So this is an absolutely fascinating topic and one that's really quite difficult to understand because of the complexity. It's difficult because it needs us as crop scientists to work even more closely with our climate scientist colleagues, and it's difficult because we have to join our models together. One very important institution in our economy is the bank. Banks manage money for individual people, corporations, and the government. Banks provide a number of important services for you and your family. Most importantly, they're a safe place to store your money. They also provide an easy way for you to transfer money from one place to another. When you write a personal check, the check authorizes the bank to give your money to the person or business whose name is on the check. Of course, banks also lend money. Ordinary people take out bank loans for a number of reasons: to pay for college, to buy or remodel a home, to start or expand a business, and so forth. Banks provide these services to individuals. However, their main function is to lend large sums of money, for example, to corporations. When people or corporations borrow money from a bank, they must, of course, pay interest, a percentage of the money they borrowed. Banks pay interest on the money they hold and charge interest on the money they lend. For a bank to make a profit, it has to collect more interest than it pays out. Sometimes banks invest money as well as lend it to invest. Money means to put it into a corporation or some other project, for example, building a housing complex or doing medical research in exchange for a share of the profits. Most businesses need loans and investments at some time, and banks are an important source of both. You might wonder what would happen if all the people with money in a bank wanted to take their money out at the same time. I mean, how would the bank be able to give everyone their money if it had lent out or invested most of it? In fact, this can be a serious problem for banks. They count on the fact that most people won't want their money for a long time. Once it's deposited, that leaves the bank free to lend or invest the money. If every person, or even lots of people, tried to withdraw their money at the same time, the bank might not be able to honor all of its deposits. This causes some banks to fail or go bankrupt. Bank failures used to be common during times of recession or depression. They were especially common during the Great Depression of the 1930s. When Franklin Roosevelt became president in 1933, one of the first things he did was closed all the banks, so depositors wouldn't panic and try to take all their money out. Number.
In animals, a movement is coordinated by a cluster of neurons in the spinal cord called the central contract pattern generator, CPG. This produces signals that drive muscles to contract rhythmically in a way that produces running or walking, depending on the pattern of pulse. A simple signal from the brain instructs the CPG to switch between modes such as going from a standstill to walking.
My current research at the moment is really quite broad. I work at the interface between the arts and humanities, particularly archaeology, but trying to find questions which are difficult to answer unless you start integrating computing and visualization. So really I work in this boundary between trying to understand cultural questions about the past, but those sorts of questions that you can't address unless you start reconstructing, start modeling and visualizing past landscapes, objects and movement of people.
And one particular crop, almond in the US and now in Australia, is transforming the world of beekeeping and of bees. What has happened is that something serendipitous came along, that people found out, that doctors found out that almonds are good for you, a confection, but it's good for you. The almond board got a very aggressive promotion going on for almonds. They actually, I just heard recently, send out sales reps to cardiologists at hospitals to promote the heart benefits of almonds. In a very good promotion of almonds, and it's legitimate promotion because they are a healthy food.
It seems to me that architecture is pretty much something that causes us both pleasure and trouble. I live in the part of Western London where I think many of the streets are really ugly, and this distresses me every time when I walk to a supermarket or walk to the tube. I do not understand why they built those buildings without architecture. A bad building has a serious impact on the people around it, which could be hundreds of years. It lasted so long, and if you write a bad book or a bad play, I will be shocked when it was shown. Suppose the book arose a little bit from the frustration, and then I realize if you talk about architecture, you will say why building are not more beautiful. Then you will say I can use such work as beauty, which is a really arrogant word. And no one knows what beautiful is. It's all in the eye of the beholder. I couldn't help but think about that actually. Well, you know that we all attempt to agree that Rome is nice than Milky Kings, and San Francisco has the edge of Frankfurt, so we can make that sort of generalization. Surely there is something we can say about why a building works or why it doesn't. So the books really attempt to suggest why architecture works when it does and what might go wrong when it doesn't work.
Pancake ice is an intermediate step between an open water configuration and a totally frozen body of water. We know that a combination of very cold temperatures and waves is necessary to make the pancakes form in the first place. After these waves make it form, there's an entire spectrum, so a wide collection of frequency waves that they would encounter, whether they be from wind shear or they be from the ocean long slow waves. The easiest way to study it is to look at each individual range of frequencies one after another. Sort of gain a wider perspective on how the pancake ice interacts with waves. The ultimate aim of our research is to better inform the meteorological modelers of the world who are looking at Antarctica, as well as the Arctic and some of the other cold regions of the world. We're conducting work in the Sea Ice Wind Wave Interaction Facility here at UNIME-IB. It was designed by the head of our department, Jason Monti. He had the foresight to use a modular design, which means there are individual sections that are stacked together, so since we're built to the space that we have in this lab right now. When we move to Fisherman's Bend, we can extend our model, and a few more sections to make it much longer. And that will enable us to have longer runtimes, have more developed waves, as well as add some other possibilities of study.
Now let's talk a video and audio as a tool for mobile, and here is the thing. It also works beautifully for social media and web too. It kills 3 birds in 1 stone. Do you know why TV does so well and films do so well? So really easy answer, we humans react best to seeing the picture, other human beings talking back to us, and playing all these stories or whatnot. Yet you will find that most of the web is texted, yet when I have a 4-minute video, it does better, or when I have the slideshow that an audio track to it. They do so much better than all my other content because we need that. This is a flat screen, we need to live it up somehow. This is a small screen, it's not easy to read lengthy text, but if I create a lengthy article, and then I create a 3-minute video or a set of 3-minute videos about it, then I am not repurposed to the use, I have differentiated from all my competitors and I use a fancy QR code to link to these. Oh my god, we're innovating at the spear. OK.
Earlier this year, I was driving through the countryside with a girl of 6, and she pointed out some flowers by the wayside. I asked her what she thought flowers were for. She gave a very thoughtful answer. 2 things, she said, to make the world pretty and to help the bees make honey for us. I thought that this was a very nice answer, and I was very sorry to have to tell her that this wasn't.
We all get depressed, bad stuff happens to us, we all get depressed, we feel lousy, we feel withdrawn. We feel sort of a sense of grief when we're taking much pleasure and we withdraw and then we get better. We cope, we heal, we deal with the things in life. What's the deal with you that you can't do that? And there is this learning sense given that all of us have periods of being depressed and come around to the end when you look at people who instead go down and stay down there to this crippled extent. There's always these little voices between the lines thereof. Come on, pull yourself together, we all deal with this sort of thing. I would make the argument throughout here that depression is as real of a biological disorder as this juvenile diabetes. And you don't sit down a diabetic and say, oh come on, what's with this influence that starts begging yourself and pull together. You will see this is just as much of biological.
For some people, this presentation may seem far-fetched, but ending poverty is both ethically, and morally, necessary and actually feasible. All of us must play a role in making it happen. All human beings want, and have a way to live in dignity, to determine our own destinies, and to be respected by other people. Despite the universality of 3 rights, our capacities to fulfill them vary enormously, and no dividing line is more profound in influencing the quality of our lives than the gulf between poverty and prosperity.
No, that was, and that's an important aspect. As you referred to earlier, we've previously done work which has proven that in some circumstances, even people whose blood pressure is not high, can benefit from blood pressure lowering rehabilitation. So in this study, the main reason that we included the patients was because of diabetes. We didn't care what their blood pressure was, whether it was high or low. And our intention was to see whether or not lowering average or below average blood pressure in diabetics was beneficial, and the effect suggested that irrespective of whether your blood pressure was high or low, if you had diabetes you profited.
Please check the information on the website for the opening times. Please check the information on the website for the opening times.
Your lowest quiz grade has been omitted from the calculations. Your lowest quiz grade has been omitted from the calculations.
Scientific beneficiary to space exploration is frequently questioned. Scientific beneficiary to space exploration is frequently questioned.
It is not always possible to find patterns in data. It is not always possible to find patterns in data.